On behalf of the Iowa Association of School Boards, welcome to our webinar entitled Igniting Your Advocacy Efforts. My name is Luann Gavist, and I'll be facilitating tonight's conversation. Leading the discussion for us tonight are ISB staff members Phil Jennery and Sean Snyder. We appreciate your participation. Your time is valuable, and your commitment to learning is a gift you give your district. The session is being recorded, and both the recording and the PowerPoint will be available on our website within a few days. The format of this webinar is designed to be interactive and conversational, so we encourage you to ask questions all throughout the webinar. To do so, open the question pane, type your question in the box, and hit the send button. I will see your questions and will read them aloud to Phil and Sean to respond to as they arise. But there will also be plenty of time at the end of the conversation for additional questions, so please be thinking about those all throughout tonight's conversation. Lastly, this is an important point. If you are having trouble hearing at any time and you are connected through your computer speakers, we really recommend that you dial into the conference telephone number. That number is listed in the audio portion of the control panel, as you can see on your screen now. And it's also included in your confirmation email. We have found that for audio quality, dialing in through your telephone is more reliable than listening through your computer itself. But first, let's get started. We're going to take a quick poll to see who we have in attendance tonight. I'm going to launch a poll. And you should see that poll on your screen now. And the question is, what is your current role? So please take a moment and answer the question, and we will see who we have with us tonight. Okay, couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Okay, so we can see that we have a nice representation between board members and our administrators this evening. Okay, I'm going to take us back to Phil's PowerPoint. And here we go. And now it's time to introduce our presenters for this evening. Phil Jennery is our ISB, and Sean Snyder is one of our actors. And together they make a powerful team when it comes to clarifying and supporting the board's role in advocacy and school finance. Phil and Sean will be focusing the discussion on issues and strategies related to the ISB Standards for Effective School Boards, and specifically on standard number 6 tonight. And for your convenience, you will see that we have uploaded a couple handouts on your window pane. You'll see that we have uploaded a copy of the ISB board standards. All you have to do is open that and you can download those documents tonight. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for being here, Phil and Sean. And Sean, you're going to start us off.
Good evening. Just a little background. One of the items we're going to talk about is the IASB's transportation and district cost per pupil proposals. Just to give you a little background, back in June, our Legislative Resolutions Committee asked us to look at both of these issues and come up with solutions that would address both transportation costs and the district cost per pupil issue. This summer, we put together a few proposals, and we shared that with our Legislative Resolutions Committee. They kind of vetted the proposals that we put together. And then we also shared that information with our board. And really, the two proposals that we're going to review this evening are the proposals that our board did approve. Did you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. And then once we discuss the two proposals, we will then go ahead and talk about advocacy strategies that can be applied not only to the transportation and district cost per pupil issue, but also other education issues that your district may face. I do want to point out that we are for tonight just using the transportation and district cost per per pupil issues as an example of advocacy. I mean, we are of a number of issues. We'll be talking about supplemental state aid and making sure that the state picks and fully funds the new statewide assessment, and also the repeal of the 2029 sunset on the state penny, and also a host of other issues during the legislative session. But for tonight's purposes, we will be talking about the transportation and district cost per pupil proposals. And then after that, we'll go into a little bit of why me? Why as a board member, superintendent, why do you make the best advocates? And then finally, we'll give you some tips that you can do right now. After hearing a lot of this information, we want you to go away with a few things that you can do right now. So I will turn it back over.
Portion represents what's remaining for instruction costs after the transportation costs are taken out. And the blue portion represents the cost per pupil of transporting students for the different school districts. So again, this is kind of a statistical look at the overall state. So on the far left-hand side, we have a district that has $6,100 programming purposes. But after you take out the transportation costs, which are $1,150 per student, that means they have remaining for regular programming purposes. Now, if you go to the far end of the spectrum there, on the far right-hand side, again, the district has roughly about $6,100 available for regular program purposes. When you factor out the transportation costs, which is $104, again, they have over $6,100 that they have available for instructing the students. So when you compare those two differences on the far left side and the far right-hand side, there's a $1,000 difference in what's remaining to instruct students. So there, again, this just shows what a wide variation there is in the impact that transportation costs have on school district budgets. And again, this is just kind of the same type of look at a statewide basis. This is basically every school district in the state. And what this does is this basically pulls out the transportation cost per pupil out of the regular program amount for each school district. And again, on the far left-hand side, you see that there's one district that basically has $5,000 available for instructing their students. But on the far right-hand side of the spectrum, we have another district that is at over $6,100. So the inequity here is over a $1,000 difference between these two districts. And when we talk about the percentage, that percentage variation is 20.2%. And when you, again, this is a map that just takes a look at the overall information of what the net operating transportation costs as a percentage to the overall regular program. So the districts that are shaded in the dark red, those are the districts that have the highest transportation costs, and that really it goes up to about 16% of the regular program budget transportation costs are taking up that much. On the other side of the spectrum of the light shaded gray districts, those are the costs aren't as great. The thing I'd point out here is, we have neighboring districts where the variation is significant. So instructing students. So there's a big difference across the state. So what our proposal does is it creates a supplementary weighting that's designated specifically for transportation funding, and this is going to be done through the school aid formula. Now we're going to create a supplementary weighting that's based on 3 factors. The first factor and the largest factor is the net operating transportation cost compared to the regular program cost. So it's similar to what those percentages were in the map that I just showed you. And really this information comes from the Department of Education. They put together a transportation report each year. So this is the data that I'm using, and really the data that they provide really should reflect the cost of transporting students to and from, and this is really the largest portion of this weighting factor. This is going to account for 90% of the total supplementary weighting. Additionally, we've added 2 other factors. One is on larger districts are going to generate a larger portion of weighting from this factor, and at the other end of the scale we have a mile factor, which provides additional weighting for the districts that are larger, they have fewer students, so they have larger route miles to cover. So those 2 factors account for 10% of the supplementary weighting, but really the major factor in this is the information from the Department of Education on the net operating transportation costs as they compare to the school district's regular program. The funding amount that we targeted is $150 million, and that, again, that is based on the fiscal year 2014 data. When you look at the report, the Department of Education's report notes that the net operating transportation costs statewide total $150 million. So that's kind of our target value when this is fully phased in and that we're looking to generate. The weighting is set to the specific level of funding per year, and to generate that specific funding of level per year, and we're targeting a 5-year phase-in, so we're going to go $30 million increase each year. Period of time, that can be adjusted, but based on our proposal, that's what we're looking at. And the funding will be based on whatever the state cost per pupil is. So this, since this is part of the school aid formula, it would be subject to supplemental state aid, so we could see increases in the overall funding for this based on supplemental state aid as well. And the level of funding in future years could be increased based on increasing the weighting factor, and I'm going to kind of go into that in a little bit. So what this proposal does is it program dollars, so there will be a separate funding stream to cover transportation costs, which will allow all school districts to increase the funding for transportation. This is built into the school aid formula. We have an assigned supplement to increase that weighting, and really, it really is a simple mechanism to provide the funding. And we believe there will be local property tax dollars included in the funding mechanism, and additionally, it will provide a budget framework for the districts to work within when it comes to transportation costs, because districts will know how much funding they're going to generate based on this provision. So this is really how it works. What I did under this proposal is just to kind of show how this works. I assumed a 2% supplemental state aid for each of the years that we're phasing this in. As I said earlier, we're really kind of targeting a $30 million amount each year over a 5-year period of time. The weighting factor is used to basically increase the weighting. So for fiscal year 18, which would be year 2 of this provision, our weighting factor would be 2. And what that does is it just doubles the initial weighting. In year 3, for fiscal year 19, our weighting factor is 3, and what that does is it really just triples the initial weighting. and so on down the line. So by year 5 in fiscal year 2021, our weighting factor under this proposal would be 5. Another thing that I would note on this is, again, since it's being funded through the school aid formula, it would be subject to the foundation level. The foundation level is 87.5%. What that means is that 87.5% of this funding is going to be coming through state aid, and the additional 12.5% will be made up of local property taxes. So overall, this is kind of what it looks like on a funding basis. The first column, the transportation supplementary weighting for fiscal year 17 would be established at 4,562. And really, that's kind of like a student FTE. We take that weighting and we multiply it times the state cost per pupil, and we do this on a district-by-district basis. When you look at the statewide total, that's going to generate $30 million for transportation funding. And again, the state aid portion of that is going to be about $26.2 million. The property tax portion would be about $3.7 million statewide. Then for year 2, we're doubling the supplementary weighting, so it's going to total just over 9,100. That's going to generate $61.2 million. The state aid portion is going to be $53.5 million, and the property tax portion is $7.6 million. Now, the one thing, I did note that we are increasing this $30 million a year, but I am assuming 2% supplemental state aid rate. So you can see the impact of that in year 2 is we've actually increased the funding because of the 2% supplemental state aid by about $1 million. So we do the same process over time. So by fiscal year 2021, which would be the year that this is fully implemented, our supplementary weighting would total 22,800. And again, based on the 2% supplemental state aid for each of the years, that's going to generate $162.3 million for transportation. The state portion of that's going to be $142 million, and the property tax amount is going to total $20.3 million. And again, we would consider that this would be fully phased in by fiscal year 2021. And again, this is kind of the cost breakdown on an annual basis. So the first on the left-hand side really shows what the proposal costs, and really that's that $30 million. So we would increase transportation funding $30 million each year through fiscal year 2021. The middle section shows the added impact of 2% supplemental state aid. So in fiscal year 2018, the added impact would be about $1.2 million resulting from 2% supplemental state aid, so on down the line until fiscal year 2021, when we'd actually see an additional $5 million in that year because of the additional 2% supplemental state aid. So the last columns over just show the total annual cost. This is kind of what the legislators would take a look at. So in fiscal year 2017, we're increasing to $30 million. In fiscal year 18, the increase would be $31.2 million. And by fiscal year 2021, the overall increase would be $35 million. So just pros and cons to this proposal. A pro is this does provide additional funding targeted for transportation to all school districts. And by creating this separate funding stream for transportation, what we're doing is we're freeing up regular program dollars for all school districts. A con, obviously, is the cost of the proposal when it's fully implemented to provide full equity. The cost would be $150 million, and that is a significant amount of money. We are definitely aware of that. But a pro of this proposal is, since it's being phased in over time, it does really soften any one-year budgetary impact on the overall state budget. So, we are targeting $150 million, but the annual ask would be $30 million a year. A con of that is, it does take 5 years to basically provide the equity that we are looking for in this solution. Another pro is it does provide flexibility in the school aid funding mechanism, and it really can be adjusted to the desired level of funding. So an example of this would be if the legislature likes this proposal and they want to implement this, but they don't feel that they have the $30 million in year 1, they could change the weighting factor and make it a half. So they could fund this at $15 million a year, maybe fund it or phase it in over a 10-year period of time. Or if, the state, we end up with this becomes a priority to fund, they could shorten the phase-in period time to 3 years, say, at $50 million a year. But really, this does provide some flexibility on how the legislature might want to implement this. Just some additional thoughts on Proposal 1. I think it's important to stress that this funding is designated for non-discretionary transportation costs. So it's really only for the mandatory costs of transportation, and it's, again, just for getting students to and from school. This program will need oversight. We would recommend a 5-year review of this every 5 years, and maybe a 3-year review every 3 years might be better suited. But we definitely think that, we're creating a separate funding stream for transportation, and it will need some oversight. As I said earlier, the phase-in period can be adjusted, so, depending what funding's available, up a 3-year period of time, or it could be lengthened out to maybe a 10-year period of time. And again, one thing I would point out is the foundation level that I used for the cost estimates was at 87.5%. That's what current code requires for a regular program. I would note that there's no reason that this foundation level can't be changed for this specific provision. So if the legislature was concerned about the property tax impact of this, they could increase the foundation level to 90% or 92%. What that does is that doesn't change the overall cost amount, but what it does is it increases the state commitment and reduces the overall property tax amount when they increase the foundation level. And as we phase this in, there may need to be a need to adjust the weightings, and I think that this proposal does allow for that. So if we do a review of this as we phase this in, we might need to make some type of adjustments to the weightings. And we have some questions.
We do, Sean. A few great questions came in, and the first is, so will the property tax portion of this have the potential to increase a district's local property tax based on their financial position to accommodate?
The way it's structured under this proposal, the answer would be yes, because this would be part of the school foundation funding and it would be part of the school district's additional levy. So again, that's where the legislature does have concern about property tax rates across the state. So that's where we have the adjustment in that mechanism where they could increase the foundation level and reduce the overall property tax burden of this proposal.
Okay. Another question is, person wants to know what funds does transportation costs come out of in school districts? Where does that funding come from?
Good question. So currently, every school district is paying for the transportation costs out of their general fund, and it's really coming out of those regular program dollars. So, like I said, for fiscal year 14, every school district generated about $6,100 per student. Those transportation costs are coming out of that $6,100. So that's where you have the variation. You have one district that has transportation costs per student of $1,000. You have another district where the transportation cost per student is actually $41. So there's a significant difference there, and what's left over is available for regular program for instruction purposes.
Sean, another question is, when it comes to transportation expenses, are you talking about bus driver salaries, bus repairs, fuels? What are you talking about there?
Yes, it would be, those are, most of the expense would be for the salaries and benefits of bus drivers. Also included in that, I don't have the detailed report in front of me, but there could be costs involved, the gas prices for the buses, the depreciation factor. So really kind of the cost of the buses are built into this as well.
I also was wondering if I'm a board member and I'm out there wondering about what kind of impact this is going to have on my district budget, what would you say to that? What kind of guidance will we have on that, Sean, or how will people know? How will this proposal impact each district's budget? Okay,
that's a good question. So really what this does is this creates a separate funding stream designated for transportation funding. So this will be part of the school district's general fund. However, the funding is designated for transportation costs only. So what this does though is it frees up those regular program dollars. So when we talked about that, we have one district that had their transportation cost is $1,000 per student. So generally under this provision, once this is fully phased in, they're going to have supplementary weighting that generates about $1,000 per student to cover those transportation costs. which will free up their entire regular program per pupil amount. All right. So we're going to move on to proposal number 2. And this is a proposal that equalizes the regular program district cost. So the difference here is we have roughly about half the school districts are at the floor. For fiscal year 2016, that amount is $6,446, and that's the regular program district cost per pupil, and that's also equal to half the districts that are somewhere above that. And the range between the maximum and the minimum is $175. So we have roughly half the districts at $6,446 and half the districts somewhere between $6,446 and $6,621. And one of the things I point out here is in this map is that we have districts, neighboring districts, where you can see the significant difference, that whole $175 difference. So the districts that are shaded in red, those are the districts that have a district cost per pupil equal to $6,446. The districts that are shaded in that dark blue, those are the ones at the max, the $6,621. So again, if you look at this map, you can see you do have neighboring districts where we have that $175 difference. So what this proposal does is this increases the floor, which would be the state cost per pupil, up to $20 per year until all the district cost per pupil amounts are equal. We've targeted a 9-year phase-in for this provision, so we're adding $20 each year from fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2024. Then in the last year, fiscal year 2025, we're going to completely close the gap by adding an additional $15. So how are districts impacted by this? Well, first of all, I want to point out that all districts will still get the per pupil growth resulting from supplemental state aid. This provision will not impact that one bit. The districts that are $20 are less than $20 above the state cost per pupil will have their district's cost per pupil amounts increased to the new state cost per pupil level. So that could be up to an additional $20 increase for those districts. The districts that are currently above the state cost per pupil will have the benefit tax relief. And the reason that happens is because when we add additional dollars to the state cost per pupil, we're also increasing the foundation level per pupil. So the districts at the higher end will actually receive the benefit. They won't receive any additional funding or spending authority, but they will be provided additional state aid in place of property tax. So really, this is how it works. The top box really just kind of shows a current law scenario. So for just again, for example purposes, for fiscal year 2017, we're assuming a supplemental state aid rate of 2%. So we go through the math of a current law scenario. We take that 2%, we multiply it times the fiscal year 2016 state cost per pupil. That gives us the per pupil growth for fiscal year 2017, and that's equal to $129. So we add that $129 to the fiscal year 16 state cost per pupil. That gives us the new current law fiscal year 17 state cost per pupil of $65.75. Under our proposal, we would add an additional, so the proposal amount state cost per pupil would be $65.95. So now this is how it works for the districts. That's in the second box. We have 3 districts, districts A, B, and C. District A is a district whose district cost per pupil is equal to the state cost per pupil. So the thing I point out there is once we set supplemental state aid, we have that per pupil growth of $129. That district gets that. So we add that to their 2016 cost per pupil amount. So their fiscal year 2017 cost per pupil is $65.75 under a current law scenario. Under our proposal, we ask the question, is the fiscal year 2017 district cost per pupil less than the new proposed fiscal year 2017 state cost per pupil of $65.95? The answer is yes. So we calculate the difference. The difference is $20. So we add that $20 on to the district cost per pupil. So the proposed district cost per pupil for District A will be $65.95. Same calculation for District B. They're $10 above the state cost per pupil. They will get that $129 growth resulting from 2% supplemental state aid. So under current law, their cost per pupil would be $65.85. Again, we ask the question, is their current district cost per pupil less than the new proposed state cost per pupil? The answer is yes. The difference is $10. So we add $10 to that district's cost per pupil, so they're at $65.95. So now we've closed that gap. There was a $10 gap between District B and District A. We've closed that gap between those two districts. For District C, they're one of the districts that are $175 above the state cost per pupil. They also get that $129 growth resulting from 2% supplemental state aid. So their district cost per pupil for fiscal year 17 will be $67.50. Again, we make that comparison to our proposed state cost per pupil. Their district cost per pupil is above the $65.95, so they do not get any of that additional bump up. So they will remain at the $67.50. We repeat this process over the 9 years, and when we do that, by fiscal year 2025, we will have closed the gap completely, and we will have every school district's district cost per pupil will be equal, and those will all be equal to the state cost per pupil as well. This is just kind of another look at the 9-year, how we phase this in. Really, it's similar to districts A, B, and C again. The thing I would point out here is by fiscal year 2017, we've closed that gap between District A and District B in year 1. It takes the rest of the time, over a 9-year period of time. So by fiscal year 2025, we can close the gap for all districts. And again, this is assuming 2% supplemental state aid. I just wanted to show this for comparison purposes only. This proposal works no matter what supplemental state aid is. So this comparison takes a look at the 9-year phase-in, assuming 0% for each year. So again, you have the same, you're adding the $20 each year. So again, by year 1, we've closed that gap between District A and District B. And by year 9, fiscal year 2025, we've closed the gap between all school districts. Funding of this proposal, really this is the breakdown of the overall funding amount. And so really what the legislature will be looking at is kind of on the annual change in the proposal, and they'll be targeting the total state aid change. So for fiscal year 2017, increasing that $20 increase in the state cost per pupil is going to require an additional $11 million. After that, from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 2025, the cost is going to range between roughly an additional $8 million up to $11 million. But again, when you factor all this in, if the legislature wanted to do this in 1 year, the overall cost would be about $97 million in state dollars. But that would also provide $12 million in property tax relief. This table just kind of shows if the legislature took no action on the current law scenario, we'd always have that difference, that $175 difference between the minimum and maximum, and we'd always have 164 districts where the state cost per pupil would be equal to the district cost per pupil, and we'd have 172 districts that would be above the state cost per pupil. So if the legislature doesn't address this issue, this is always going to remain in place. Now, what the proposal does is we close that gap so that you can see that by fiscal year 2025, we have all 336 school districts where the district cost per pupils are equal, and it's equal to the state cost per pupil. And the one thing that I did want to point out too, as we increase the foundation level because of the added $20, it does provide some additional property tax relief on a per pupil basis for the districts that have a higher district cost per pupil, and that's reflected over in the right-hand columns. So the pros and cons of this proposal. A pro is that all districts get something every year. Either they're going to have an additional per pupil increase, which is going to increase their spending authority, or they're going to have added property tax relief. So the districts that aren't getting they aren't going to get any additional funding, but they will be provided added property tax relief. A pro of this is it does equalize the district cost per pupil across the state. A con of that is since we're facing this in over a 9-year period of time, we're not achieving that goal right away. It is going to take some time. But a pro to that is we're kind of easing the burden on the overall state budget. Just some final thoughts on this proposal. Again, this is one of those proposals where the phase-in period could be adjusted. Could be shorter or it could be longer. Again, it kind of depends on the state budget situation. So if we are in tough budget times, if they wanted to lengthen the phase-in period, they could do that. If our revenues are robust and they want to shorten this phase-in, they could do that as well. Just again, note that if this were done in 1 year, the state cost would be $97 million, but that would also provide about a $12 million reduction in local property taxes. And I would also note that future year costs would be impacted by any extension of the supplemental state aid property tax replacement payment. That provision is currently in place through fiscal year 2017, so if that were extended beyond that time, the state cost of this proposal would go up. Questions?
Yep, we have a couple more questions, Sean. Thank you. The first is, why is, in terms of the district cost per pupil, why is there a difference in the district cost per pupil?
Good question. So really, back in the 1970s when they created our school aid formula, basically they took the total cost and they divided it by the enrollment. And they calculated what would be considered a state cost per pupil amount. And then they took a look at all the school districts across the state, and any district that was below that cost, basically they brought them up to that floor. So the state cost per pupil is really kind of the floor of the district cost per pupil. Districts that were above that, basically they were kind of squeezed down. So I think at one time the percentage difference was about 10%, and that was squeezed down even further to 5%. And really it's where that 5% difference was, that's where the $175 maximum, that range comes into play. So really that's kind of how this was created.
We also have another question back regarding the transportation funding. It's okay, we'll go ahead and take it just now before we get into the advocacy. So we have a question on how will the transportation funding proposal, how will this proposal affect bus purchases from Pupil or SAVE?
Good question. So that is one of those limitations in the data that will probably need to be adjusted. And right now, and I've spoken to the Department of Education, there really isn't a way to factor that in or factor that out of what they've collected for data. So as we move forward with this proposal, if it does get implemented, since we do have a phase-in period, that is something that we'll have to take a look at and really try to pull those costs out of the net operating transportation costs.
Well, I want to thank those that have taken time to submit questions. We continue to suggest that you submit your questions throughout the evening. And now let's hear from Phil. Phil, you're going to talk about advocacy strategies.
Yeah. Thank you, Luann. Yeah, we will now go ahead and talk about advocacy strategies that can be applied not only to what you just heard with the transportation and the district cost per pupil, but also any other issue that your district faces. And this brings us to our second poll question of the evening, and I will let Luann take over for this second poll question.
Okay, so we have another question. I'm going to launch it now. So we have, the question is, does your board team have a person assigned for advocacy currently? You can see the answers. Go ahead and make your selection. We'll leave it open for a few seconds. And then we'll look and see. And I'm curious, don't answer the question, Phil, but I'm curious as to what your prediction is going to be on what you think people are going to. Okay. Let's go ahead and, you ready? Let's see what the answer is. Here we go. I'm going to close the poll. Oh, a couple more people are voting. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and then we will share the results. Here we go.
Okay, so it looks like about a quarter, 26% said yes, they do, that the board team does have someone assigned for advocacy. And a little over half, 53%, said no, they do not, and about 21% said not sure. Not necessarily overly surprised. Right. There are folks that they, you know, some board members are very involved in advocacy. Others, you know, like I said, they might have talked about advocacy a few times and had maybe talked about the idea of having somebody, so they're not quite sure if that was done yet. but hopefully we can, hopefully this webinar will help out those 53% that did not, and hopefully that number can go down dramatically.
It's an opportunity for conversation. I'm going to hide the poll and take you back to your PowerPoint.
Okay, so you might be asking yourself, why is it so important that I, as a board member or superintendent, advocate? Well, for board members, you are locally elected. The same people that vote in your election also vote for, and one of the things too that legislators view school board members as sort of the pulse of the community. You are there every day in your community, where those legislators are here in Des Moines 4 or 5 months out of the year. So you're talking with people every day. You're going to the grocery store, you're going to the doctor's office, or out to eat, and you're conversing with your constituents. So you really know what is on their minds right then and there, where legislators can only find that out maybe through emails or when they come back home on the weekends. And then also for why you have an expertise in education. You are viewed as an education expert. You deal with education issues daily and have a firm grasp of what is going on in the district. You know that the challenges and the successes of your district. So legislators look to you to get that information. And also, you're not a hired lobbyist. You're not viewed as somebody coming up there and talking to them on all the time. So I would imagine that some legislators might view you as another special interest group, but be reminded that you're not paid. You are a volunteer that is passionate about education issues, and that shows when you speak with legislators. You can give them those stories specifically related to your district. And then also, overnight, the state of Iowa has over 1,900 locally elected board members, and together 1,900 of you have a louder and greater impact than two lobbyists, myself and Emily Piper. Legislators want to hear from board members more than they want to hear from us. It's really great that when we talk with legislators, that they say, oh yes, my boards have been very active. They've called me, they've emailed me. Really helps us when we're talking about the issue to create that sense of urgency with them. So that voice is a lot louder when you have spoken with your legislators. One of the things that I've heard too from board members is, when I'm talking to my legislator, I don't know necessarily all the answers to questions that they ask me, and I don't want to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, and I don't want to stammer and say, I don't know. But don't let that deter you. Don't view that as a barrier in your advocacy efforts. More than likely, you will probably know the answer to their questions, since you deal with that every day. But if on the rare occasion you do not know an answer, tell your legislator that you will have myself or Emily contact them. That way, it gives us a direct in, kind of gives us a warm lead, so to speak, to call them and say, well, hey, Senator Smith, got a call from a board member last night. You were talking about supplemental transportation and a district cost per pupil issues. you got a question, they weren't quite sure what the answer was, they let me know. Just wanted to touch base with you about that specific issue, and here's your answer. So really kind of helps us out there, and it provides us the contact that legislator. So moving on, sort of how and who to deliver the message. Obviously, emails and phone calls are the most common form of contact. One thing that you can do that is often missed and will get your email lost in a is when you're writing your email or leaving a voicemail, make sure that you let them know that you're a constituent. Maybe put the word constituent in the email header, the email subject, or when you're leaving a voicemail, say, hey, Representative Jones, I'm Phil Jennery, board member here, and I'm a constituent, blah, 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 and you leave your voicemail. We hear from legislators all the time that say, if it says constituent in the header, when they open up their email, those emails go directly to the top, and those are the ones that get answered first. So want to make sure that you're putting that in there to get their attention. Sure. Yeah. Looks like we have a question. And
yeah. Phil, I just have a question. It seems like I think there's some board members assume that a lot of other people are already advocating,
yeah,
and that I don't really need to because I don't, a lot of the legislators are already getting emails in their inboxes, but then I'll hear from you or Emily or from legislators themselves that say sometimes they don't get contacted at all. Do you find that the case?
Yeah, that is pretty common. We sometimes, we do hear from legislators, and I'll probably allude to this a little bit later. When we're talking with a legislator and we're telling them how important an issue is, and they kind of tell us, well, I haven't heard that at all from from my constituents or from my board members or a superintendent, and that really kind of defeats our argument that this really isn't an important issue. So then the legislator views that as, well, it's just the lobbyists who are the hired people, trying to push this issue. That's just them creating something that's not really there. Absolutely. You can't rely, just sort of like in everyday life, if you need to vacuum your carpet, you don't necessarily hope that somebody else will do it. If you want to make sure it's done, you do it. So and it doesn't necessarily have to be a long email or phone. It doesn't have to be take a lot of your time, but just making sure that you're sending a quick email or phone call will really help. So talking about we hit on emails and phone calls. Want to talk a little bit about earned media when you're trying to deliver your message. And so earned media, the editorials and television coverage. These are really great ways to make sure that your opinion receives wide coverage. One of the things in an earlier life, when I worked in campaigns, one of the jobs that I had to do every day when I came to the office was pick up a copy of the Register, go through the opinion section every day, and look to see if there were any letters to the editor about our candidate, about the race, keeping tabs on the voice of citizens, and kind of keeping track of, okay, this was, we had two good ones, 2 bad ones, 4 bad ones, 4 good ones, and I would report that back to our campaign managers. So kind of kept them sort of the pulse of what are people thinking, that people are taught, they would adjust strategy accordingly if a common theme was coming up. So that does have an impact. Not just another thing that we ask you to do. There is a purpose for that. I have here sort of grass tops versus grassroots, and maybe some of you are asking, when thinking of writing a letter to the editor or an opinion editorial, think about who it might come from. Someone who might be considered grassroots might be a parent or a grandparent. A grass top signer might be a business or community leader. Maybe another elected official such as a city council person, mayor, board of supervisors. Educate and activate these folks to your efforts. I think sometimes in this scenario, an underutilized avenue is media coverage. Most everybody watches their local news, and if you can tell your a district story or get out your message, that really helps get word out. Most reporters are looking for stories to cover, so make it a compelling argument. We had at our convention, I was talking with a board member, and they had said that they kind of had issues with helping a special education student. It was not learning at the same rate, so they used some of their save funds to with one of the apps or however they used it. So that's a great in efforts to get the sunset on the state penny. I can also say, because my sister-in-law used to be a reporter, that if you tie in food to a story, you probably will usually get it covered. And that's becoming the fastest way to communicate instantaneous. Business leaders, teachers, Facebook, or tweet at a legislator, the higher chance that they will view your issue as a priority. They don't want to be seen as oblivious to their constituents' needs. And then, helping to deliver your message really helps having a relationship with your legislator. By having an already established relationship, you can bypass probably the most critical step when building a relationship, and that is earning respect and credibility. Your opinion and advice probably will mean more than what two lobbyists in Des Moines might say. So sometimes who the messenger is more important than how that message is delivered. And most legislators want to get things accomplished for their constituents. This informs. Maybe a legislator doesn't take a stance on an issue that might be a win, but they want to say yes to you. And that is why, even if your legislator is in the extreme of either party and might hardly ever vote for you or a vote the way you want them to, it is still important to keep talking to them. They do not want to continually say no to you, and they might even do something for you if they like you, which kind of goes to the old adage of saying thank you. That really helps. If you say, hey, I noticed that you voted against this or voted for this, really appreciate it, thanks. That can go a long way. And one of the things that you also might do is finding the gatekeeper. By gatekeeper, we're not talking the Ghostbusters version of the gatekeeper, but someone that has an already established relationship or has some kind of connection. Perhaps they went to high school or college together. They're from the same town or area. They have the same interests. Their kids are in the choir or sports together. That can be a great way to get your message out. And then finally, when speaking to your legislators, give them specifics. Tell them exactly what transportation aid or any issue might mean to your district. Don't just tell them that you need more money. Give them specifics and say what you have been doing. You've been streamlining and going over your budget to find ways to eliminate wasteful spending. Better yet, instead of just telling them, show them. Invite them into your school to show them what these issues mean to your district by telling your district story. And just quickly, what you can do, make advocacy part of your agenda every month. One of the handouts we advocacy plan. We have our sessions going in 2 years, so we have that set up for that. Assign a board member or board members to be the advocacy point person. Create an advocacy plan, and make it a point to contact your legislator every month. If it's just one time a month or even one time a year. Anything is better than nothing, and it gets the conversation started. And then finally, report those conversations back to ISB staff. We love to know what legislators have been saying. So when we speak to them, we can tell them, hey, we've been hearing a lot from board members about this issue. We know that this is a big issue here. So that really helps us out when you report those conversations back to us. So if there are any questions, I can go ahead and take those.
We have another great question that just came in, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it for the benefit of everyone. So this board member says, it strikes me that it will be very difficult to get legislators and/or the governor to allocate additional funds this year to either of these issues discussed earlier. If they do, supplement in a negative way because of it. Here's a great, really zeroing in on the issue. What should be priority? Advocate to maximize SSA, the supplemental state aid, or to begin attacking these issues if it can't be both because of limited state funds? Where's the biggest point?
That's a great question. Because there's only so much money to go around, and as Sean said, the transportation is $30 million a year, and district cost per pupil is about 10, and it looks like the Department of Education is requesting $10 million for the statewide assessment, and about 1% of SSA is about 51.
About 40 million.
Oh, 40 million. Okay. So know that we will be advocating for timely and adequate supplemental state aid. We know that is such an important issue. And it's sort of, I know that the question is, do we want to prioritize? When let's see what the December REC numbers say. I think the latest numbers for November kind of showed a little bit of an improvement, not as bad as what maybe some expected. So, let's hope that December helps out as well. But as of right now, we are going to be going after everything, and we're going to be going after it as hard as we can. And once the budget kind of comes into once that starts to take shape, we can go from there. But we do realize that there are budget limitations, and that's why we have proposed things that would help ease the burden on the budget.
And we have a couple key advocacy events coming up. Do you want to visit about those for a minute?
Yeah. Thanks, Lynn. So we will be having action advocacy workshops coming up in the months of January and February. These have been will be custom designed for that area. We hope that all of your superintendents and board members can come. We really want to make it about your area, issues that are facing your district, and then also and then be able to talk about advocacy strategies that will help get those issues pushed forward. So there is a registration link on our website that you can go to and sign up for any of these workshops that are in your area. And then we have our Day on the Hill, February 8th, where we'll be talking about a few things that are issues that are happening up at the legislature, issues that we're hearing about, and then we will take everybody up to the Capitol in the afternoon to have you discuss those issues with your legislators. So there's also, I think, a sign up on our website as well. So make sure you reserve one of those dates for the action advocacy workshops and also our Day on the Hill.
And the next slide talks about we are going to be continuing our series of webinars focused on our ISB board standards. You can see the slide in front of you. We have 3 great webinars coming up, and the complimentary webinars coming up in January and in February. All these webinars, along with our other events, can be found on the digital portion, digital campus portion of our website. ISB is here to help you. We are just a quick phone call away. If you have any questions for Sean or Phil, their contact information is on our website. It's in the PowerPoint. Please let us know how we can serve and support you in your leadership role for excellence in board governance. This webinar was recorded, and we will post it on our website for viewing, along with a copy of the PowerPoint presentation on the digital campus portion of our website. I want to remind you that for participating in today's webinar, you will receive 5 Better Boardsmanship credits, so thank you. Also, you will receive an email tomorrow with a link to our survey about this webinar. Please take time to respond. Your feedback is appreciated and helps inform ISB supports and services such as this one tonight. We really do listen to your feedback. On behalf of IASB, thank you once again for your participation in our online conversation. To Phil and to Sean, to you both, thank you for sharing your vast experience and expertise with our members. Take care, everyone, and good night.